Now, admittedly, this article I'm about to read to you is a few months overdue. It was made back in late October, early November. And at the time I wrote this in response to Election Day coming up because I noticed a trend within not only the ABP but within the larger third positionist movement overall. And that was this idea that the Republican Party, while not being ideal and not being what we want, will get us to a fascist nation in the end. Whereas the Democrats will lead us in the exact opposite direction. Now, to a certain extent, I get it. I understand it. When people first come into this movement, they don't become full-blown fascists overnight. They usually come from the right side of the political spectrum, from conservatism, from the Republican Party, sometimes libertarians. And you just don't abandon everything you believe all at once. You hang on to this thing called residue. Not in its organic sense that like you step on something and you have residue on your foot, but in the sense that these ideals are ingrained in you from an earlier age, and they become who you are. So when you start to change politically, it takes time to get rid of them. Now, that's understandable. The problem is that when they've been in the movement for a while and they can't get the residue off. And this I saw reflected in things like people going to bat and all out for Brett Kavanaugh. Now, whether Brett Kavanaugh was guilty or not, I don't know. But the fact that we have fascists going to bat for a conservative Republican nominee to the Supreme Court like he's one of us troubled me greatly. Because this wasn't about truth and honesty. If a liberal Democrat was accused of sexual harassment, how many Republicans, how many of us would go to bat for this individual? I don't remember any, and I don't think there would be. So this is not about the truth or honesty of the accusations. It is about going to bat for a Republican against a Democrat. And this was distressing. So part of this article I wrote to kind of combat this, what I saw going on within the community in regards to Brett Kavanaugh. Now, the other half is more general. It's the idea that Republicans get us closer to where we want to be. Now, let's extrapolate from this idea. So, if Carter had beaten Reagan in 1980 or Dukakis had beaten Bush in 1988, would this country be worse off? Or let's go a step further. If we have had nothing but Republican administrations and Republican Congresses since the end of World War II, would we be closer to where we want to be? Would we have a fascist country and a fascist nation? I think when we look at it that way, this idea of any kind of affiliation with conservatism is absolutely ridiculous. It's conservative Republicans who gave us globalism, who imposed the free market on us, this terrible healthcare system we have now. All of these things put together are absolute disasters. Now the Democrats aren't much better when it comes to the economy than the Republicans are. They are a little bit better because they don't have these excesses and extremes that the right does when it comes to economics. But the right, their solution to our problems is to take government out of the social sphere, is to cut taxes on the wealthy even more. And all of these ideas, when put together, give us companies going overseas. It gives us cheap labor in the form of immigration. And it leads to people with college degrees or graduate degrees working in a Walmart or a Target. Now, there's nothing wrong with working in a Walmart or Target. That's fine work, but not when you have a college degree or a graduate degree. It's absolutely dehumanizing. And because we have such a tight labor market nowadays and actual unemployment a lot higher than the statistics give us, it's not a good situation out there with people forced to make decisions like, do I pay for my healthcare bill this month, or do I pay rent or buy groceries? And when you live in a society where healthcare is so darn expensive that you can't afford to see a doctor when you're sick, or you have to make a tough choice when one of your family members gets sick, what are you supposed to think of that country? Honestly. I mean, the reason why we see so many values that are contrary to what is considered traditional Christian ethics is because people in the society we live in today are taken away from these larger social units which really define who we are. They're taken away from the family, they're taken away from the nation and the state. They don't have a connection with these entities because the society we live in is so absolutely toxic. And voting for more Republicans is not going to make it any better. In a lot of ways, it makes it worse. And so I wrote this article as an attempt to get through to people that, especially voting for one side or the other is giving legitimacy to a system which doesn't deserve legitimacy. We're not going to by force of arms overthrow the government and install a fascist state overnight. We have to delegitimize the system itself, have people lose confidence in what they see and hear. Once that starts to happen, changes can start to be made. And so that was the main point I was trying to get through here. I hope you enjoy this. It's called Don't Do It. Hey, look, I get it. Most of us come from the right side of the political spectrum. Our journey to fascism most likely originated in the frustration of seeing an inept conservatism attempt to implement its agenda in the face of a hostile media and liberal political establishment. This view is not an easy one to shake. Residue is not just something organic which clings to you after an attempt to wipe it off. It can also symbolize ideas which remain long after their usefulness expires. In the ABP, we come across this with most new members. Especially in this culture, nobody's first political doctrine is fascism. We live in a society founded on classical liberal ideals ingrained in our subconscious from an early age. And while contemporary politics often manifests itself very differently, at a foundational level, the God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have come to define us as a people. As we grow and mature, the happy smiley face which covers the facade of the society we inhabit begins to crumble before our eyes. Individuals adopt a variety of means to compensate for the decay of their reality. The right likes to blame the left, claiming that Marxists have stealthily invaded our political and academic institutions, brainwashing an ignorant but well-meaning populace, while the left transforms the boogeyman in the closet and portrays it as the fascist in the closet, implying that we're constantly on the verge of a fascist takeover, or that our country is currently fascist. What these points of view have in common is a complete denial of reality, an attempt to make reality conform to preconceived notions of virtue and truth. It's a simplistic, myopic construct which reveals a sickness at the foundation of our politics and institutions. Increasingly over the last decade or two, more and more individuals are beginning to recognize the fallacy of contemporary politics and look into alternatives which have been shunned since the end of the Second World War. For those who have made this journey, the road is never traversed without bumps and potholes. The drive is through an environment littered with vestiges of the worldview left behind, always there to tempt the wanderer to come back, and many times the novice fascist is unable to resist the siren call and ends up abandoning his or her new philosophy. Others continue down the road but find the residues of past political beliefs difficult to shake, oftentimes coming back to the original starting point of believing fascism to be conservatism on steroids. And hey, I get it. Temptation is tempting for a very good reason. It's hard not to be sympathetic to the right when you see clean-cut Trump supporters being physically and verbally assaulted by anarchists and Antifa demonstrators who operate in secrecy, unwilling to show their faces, and who have a vocabulary which would make George Carlin blush. Or when images are shown of children at LGBT parades being exposed to values contrary to accepted notions of decency. The resulting emotion produced is one of anger and defiance. Our two-party system, being what it is, leaves the novice fascist with the only perceived option being one of supporting the lesser of two evils, the Republican Party. What needs to be asked, though, is whether the support of the Republican Party gets us closer to where we want to be, or is it solidifying the social trends that we abhor? Recently, there's been a surge of discussion and activity by members surrounding the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. To many, the allegations surrounding him resemble previous attempts by the left to smear those on the right due to political disagreements. So the temptation comes back to close ranks around a perceived ally against the amorality of the left. The alleged truth of these accusations is not the issue at stake here. If they were, then conservatives would go to bat for liberals whenever they feel that they were being falsely accused of sexual harassment, something which has not happened and something which probably never will. It might be on a subconscious level, but the defense of Kavanaugh is a swerving off the road of fascist thought and into the direction of the residual ideology of conservatism. Much like the temptation brought about by the election of Trump, the controversy of Kavanaugh threatens our philosophical integrity. Support for not only Kavanaugh but for conservatism itself inevitably leads to support for Republicans at the ballot box. Part of our desire to cast a vote on Election Day is inevitably a byproduct of the residual harping that has been drilled into us since a young age about the importance of doing your duty, of your patriotic obligation as an American to cast a vote. Upon reflection, these phrases lack any specific meaning. Much like the Bill of Rights and American political thought in general, the right to actually engage in a specific action is valued more highly than the content of that actual action. Speech itself is valued more highly than the type of speech being used. The right to bear arms is looked upon as a good in itself, outweighing how those arms are used, and it is also the same with voting. The act of voting is looked upon as an inherently patriotic act, without regards to who is being voted into office. The form counts more than the substance of the act being done. Rights, being something viewed as innate in humanity, are looked upon as goods in themselves. A vote given out of the obligation rationale is a vote for the system which it sustains. Opposition to the current political structure and its rationale is not unpatriotic, and despite what others like to say, the refusal to vote doesn't take away your moral authority to complain about those put into office. To the contrary, those unhappy with the present system who vote out of an inward need to do their patriotic duty despite the lack of quality choices forfeit their right to complain about that system. It's only through a false sense of obligation to a system, which is defined by its corruption, that the system is able to perpetuate itself. As we travel down the road to fascism, many of us are able to shake the sense of obligation to the system, but soon come across an even stickier residue: the attraction to the ideology left behind, conservatism. At root, the tug of war between the new and the old is whether support for the old can get us to the new. The pathway may be slower, but travels off the beaten path could theoretically still get us to our endpoint. Or at least that's what advocates of the lesser of two evils theory would like us to believe. To hold this theory as valid, one would be required to believe that the country as we know it today would be markedly worse off if Carter had beaten Reagan or Dukakis had beaten Bush, or if the variety of Republican Congresses we've had over the years were instead controlled by Democrats. This belief is connected to one mentioned earlier, which tries to rationalize supporting the current system through a simplistic evaluation and a resulting solution to the present problems. If only we had more moral conservatives in office, the progressive advance of moral decay would be halted and even reversed. This point of view takes the symptom of the problem for being the actual problem, ignoring larger social policies pursued by both parties which create atomic individuals and destroy communities. In fact, abortion rates were at their highest throughout the 1980s, reaching a peak in 1990 before coming down. This despite those on the right advocating for criminalizing the procedure. The free market policies advocated by conservatives are equally, if not more, responsible for the moral decay we see across the nation. While the repetitive viewing of immoral acts on the television or computer screen can numb a person to those acts in real life, being without the means of supporting your family, or occupying most of your waking hours in a meaningless job, or not being able to see a doctor out of inability to pay the doctor's bill, will numb the individual to any larger connection with his community and nation, viewing these as the source of his frustrations and anger. These larger social units being the true representation of his individuality, their devaluing in his own mind leads to the subsequent devaluing of all of their building blocks. The present system does not survive because it works. On the contrary, it creates a cynical narcissism, which is a cancer on the body politic. It survives because people who should have known better help to perpetuate it. The lesser of two evils mindset, the sense of obligation, the insistence on using talking points from Fox News and Alex Jones will keep alive something which should have been replaced long ago. Liberal democracy won't be overthrown violently in a coup d'etat, Only through the loss of legitimacy will real change occur. The continued use of the ballot box, with the only option being the lesser of two evils, takes us off the road we're on and back into the waiting arms of the residue we swore to leave behind. Thank you very much.